Hello friends, it's Chari. Today I have a trio of pull and slide surprise cards to share with different hobby themes. So for these cards, I'm using some older sets that I love. This is Let's Barbecue. I am also using Sewn with Love and Baked with Love. I really love these sets. Even though they're older, I just love the images in them. And for each of these cards, I've already made my color palettes here with the pattern papers I'm going to use. I started with those plaid papers from the Falling Leaves collection, and then I found some watercolor wishes to go with each of them. So I've kind of piled them up in their little color schemes. The piece that's already cut down for the back panel is 3.5 by 4 3/4. That's that green piece there that I set aside. Now this piece is going to be the tab that we pull, and then the plaid is going to be the main panel of the pull and slide. So for each of these, I'm just going to line these dies up and cut all these pieces. So I have my tab, my main panel, and the green will be my background. So I'm just going to stack these together, and I'm laying them up here on a kraft cardstock card base. Then for the next pile, I'm going to do the same, cut the tab, the plaid panel for the front, and that Watercolor Wishes panel for the back. And then I'll do the same for the third. So for these, you're going to see me kind of work in batches, which is a really fun way to do a bunch of cards. All of these are kind of the same card recipe, but using different stamp sets for each card. So I've got my little piles here. For these, I am going to use Baked with Love for that yellowy color. I'm doing the sewing themed one on that peachy color and the barbecue grilling hobby one on the blue. So now I need to stamp out all my images that I'm going to use for each one. I did kind of plan ahead just by laying my stamps onto the pull and slide what images I was going to use for each card. So I've stamped out all of my images on white cardstock with jet black ink so that I can color with my alcohol ink markers. So I'm starting out with the barbecue set or the grilling hobby stamp set here. And I am starting out with some browns for my hot dog. I am speeding up my coloring today, so I know this is really fast, but I have a lot of images to get through and I don't want my video to be too terribly long, especially because we're making 3 cards today. So moving on to the lettuce, using 2 colors of green. I'm going to use those same colors of green up here on this skewer. I'm guessing this is some kind of green vegetable, not really sure what since it's just kind of square. Of course, I have to color the hot dog, and I have 2 hot dogs here. This one's going to go on the fork. Next on to the mustard. Now on my finished card, I did actually stamp out another bottle and color it red like ketchup. So when you see me pop up here to color those 2 round circles, which I am assuming are tomatoes on this skewer, just know that I used that same color to color my ketchup bottle. Now onto the little fork. There is also the spatula in this set, which would be super cute. And then for this other piece on the skewer up here, I'm going to color it in a really crazy color in just a minute. It's going to be purple because I wanted it to look like it was a red onion. And then I'm blending it out with a lighter color. Can't forget my hamburger down here. And then onto the big piece, which is that grill. I thought I could color this in a really bright color, but we have a lot of colors going on the card, so I decided to stick with a more traditional gray color. So I have 2 shades. Then on the inside, I'm doing the lighter shade. I've left the center there blank because I'm going in with a really dark gray and then a color that I don't use too terribly often, which is going to be black actually. So I colored the rest of the way in. I made this look like charcoal down in the grill. Now moving on to my baking items. I just love coloring this cute little butter that says butter. It is one of my favorite stamps in this set, along with that stand mixer. I'm moving on to the bowl, and I'm going to use some different shades here to make it look like it's shadowed inside the bowl. And of course, a red stripe on it for an accent. I have a really pale E000 for all those light colors like the flower and the egg. I will use those same colors for the piping bag as well when I get around to that. Then of course I have my wooden spoon. And I kind of stamped it upside down. It needs to go in the other direction. So that's why my shading is on the top of the spoon, because when I assemble it, it will be flipped the other way. And then that stand mixture, which I just love so much. Of course, mine has a metal bowl, so I'm coloring it a lot like mine. And then it is also a red mixer, so you're going to see me color that red here in a minute. This is the piping bag, and those same colors I use for the egg and the flower. And then on to a red stand mixer. I can't ever seem to color this in other colors. It's always red to me. I guess because my stand mixer at home is red as well. And that lighter color I had was just a little too light, and I didn't like the base, so I colored the red over the gray, and it gave me kind of a darker tone, and I thought that was a really great way to darken up the top where that lighter color didn't work for me. So I just went over the red with that gray. For the bag of flour, I'm using that E70, but I am going to end up pulling in the E71 and adding a little bit darker shading to the outside. I kind of like the texture that the flicks of my marker made on the flour bag, so I did not blend those out to make them smooth. I left them looking the way they are. For the little shaker, I added a bunch of dots so it looks like sprinkles. And then I'm going to have this bright pink cupcake. Now, this cupcake is pretty bright pink and it doesn't really go with the papers that I'm putting this on, but this cupcake's going to go on the inside when we pull the slider open. So now on to my sewing items. My sewing machine is in my craft room that has this really pretty aqua color on the walls. So instead of coloring it white like an actual sewing machine, I thought it would be fun to color this one blue. It matches the walls of my craft room. So I'm using the same colors I use for the bowl on my baking stuff. And then that BG57, that's going to be my dark accent color. I'm going to use that to color in the stripes and the wheel and the buttons on the sewing machine. Moving on to all the grays, of course I have my thimble and my scissors that I need to color in gray. And of course our little tomato pincushion, we have to have some bright reds for that and some green for the top. All these sewing items really became a rainbow of colors. So I decided to pull in some purple. The scissors were a perfect place for purple. You are going to see me pull that in here a little bit later. The spools, of course, I'm coloring in a light brown. And that one that has the thread, I'm going to color that red. That's going to go on top of my sewing machine. I am actually going to stamp out another one of those spools and another one of the big buttons. You'll see me do that here at the end. And you can also see that I stamped out the word sew up there. There is a die in the die set that cuts out that word. So that is why I went ahead and stamped that out with the images I'm coloring. So now I'm working on all my buttons in various colors, and I'm just using colors I've already used. And then I'm coloring this large button in the same color as my sewing machine. I decided I wanted another spool and another button so I could fill my card a little bit more. And it was a great opportunity to pull in the purple again and some green because I only had the green in the button jar. So I've cut out all of the images with the coordinating dies and I've placed them in my little piles. I've also cut out a stitch sentiment banner from speckled eggshell cardstock, and that's where the sentiment's going to go on each of these cards. So I have a little tip to share with stamping inside the pull and slide surprise. Here I have just cut a piece of white cardstock. This is just scrap cardstock that I have. This is the front panel just folded, and I'm using this as a template, and you're going to see me use this for all three of my cards. Rather than using my front panels, even though these are pretty simple, if you've used one that you've inked or you've stenciled and you've worked on, you don't want to use that as your template and run the risk of stamping on it. So instead of trying to line it up, then remove the template, I'm just using this on all of my cards. And if I get it dirty from stamping, it doesn't really matter. So I stamped birthday. That birthday was from the All the Party Hats stamp set. This Happy Father's Day sentiment is from the Happy, Happy, Happy stamp set. And then for this one that says so much, because the sentiment on the front is going to say thank you, I'm using Simply Sentiments, and I'm only stamping up the word much, which you saw me do on the word birthday as well. I used the Post-it to mask off the other words in the stamp and only ink up the one that I want to use. I'll go ahead and glue that word so right in there. So while I'm stamping sentiments, I need to stamp the ones on the front. So this one will just say thank you, which you can see is the first part of that thank you so much sentiment. For the birthday card, I'm using the stamp sentiment from Baked with Love, but I'll only be inking up the part that says have a sweet so that the rest of the sentiment can be on the inside where I stamped birthday. And then for the Father's Day card, I'm just using the sentiment from Let's Barbecue that says relish the day. Now the pull and slide die does have this die that cuts these little strips. I cut out 6 sets so that I can double stack them on each card and have a little bit more space. I do need to fold the front panel. There are score lines that the die creates. So we're going to create a valley fold at the top, a mountain fold in the middle, and another valley fold at the bottom to create this little kind of foot. This is where we're going to put our adhesive, is on the bottom of this little foot piece. And I am using 1/4 inch double-sided adhesive tape to do this. And while I'm folding and putting my adhesive on there, I went ahead and did the other 2 cards so that they are ready to assemble. And now I need to put my spacers on the back side. So I'm putting a little line of glue right along the back of that stitch line from the die, and I'm just going to put 1 strip on each side. I did cut these from kraft cardstock so that they match the card base for each of these cards. And once I have 1 strip on there, I'm just going to put another line of glue and layer the second one on. I did do something a little different with the other 2 cards, which I think actually worked a little better if you are doubling up these stabilizers to make them just a little bit thicker. I went ahead and laminated the 2 pieces together before I put them onto my card. So you're going to see that here in a minute. Now that my spacer pieces are adhered down, I can add that pull panel. So I'm lining up the top edge and I'm lining up the tab. Then I'm pulling off that adhesive liner and I'll just stick it right down so you can see it slides perfectly. So let me show you that again. And here is where I put my 2 stabilizer pieces together first to make it kind of nice and thick and stiff. This actually worked really well because it was a little stiffer and they were easier to glue onto the back of the panel. So I'm just putting a line of glue and laminating them together, making sure they are lined up, and then I can add them to the back of my panel with a line of glue as well. So right along that edge, and I'll line these up right on the edge as well. Then I can add my pull tab panel, which is that purple one. I went ahead and pulled off that liner paper. I'm lining up the top edge, centering the tab, and sticking it down. And then you're going to see me do that on this last one. I've already glued those stabilizer pieces on. I'm going to take my tab, line up the top edge, make sure that tab is centered in that little notch, and just stick that little foot part down, and now it will slide perfectly. So now I can add my back panels where my sentiments were stamped to each of these. I'm just adding a line of liquid glue down those spacers. On this one I did add a little bit of glue at the bottom, but with those double spacers I realized it didn't really stick to the panel very well because of the space. So you're not going to see me add that to the other 2. I don't really think it's necessary if the bottom's open because nothing's falling out of there or anything like that. So I just did the glue on the spacers for this one. I'm lining that up with that back panel and making sure it's stuck down. So there is my birthday sentiment, and now I am gluing that third one. And again, this back panel is cut to 3.5 inches wide by 4 3/4 tall, but you can always measure that front panel. It's the same measurements. So now I'm ready to put together my little collages. And for each of these, this banner that goes in the center is kind of going to act like the spine of the design. But I did cut an extra banner that has nothing on it, and I am lining that up right on the fold. So the top half of the banner is above the fold, and the bottom half of the banner is what is glued to that bottom panel. Then I can glue all my images on the top to that banner. So the key to this is to create your collage in such a way that all the items are touching the banner or touching each other. So you can see I'm starting out with the sewing machine and the spools glued right to the banner. And then for these other pieces, we can't have them float unless you want to use some acetate to make them kind of float in the air. So I'm making sure that they're all at least touching each other in one place or another. Now before I put the images on the bottom, I am going to go ahead and put my sentiment banner on here, and I'm just basically sandwiching those pieces in between the two banners. This way I could have tucked these down behind the banner more if I wanted, and it wouldn't have affected how much of the sentiment you see. Now I can add all my images to the bottom. And for these, it doesn't quite matter as much if they're touching because they are all going to be glued to the panel. And for this one, I actually thought it needed something a little extra up towards the top. So I pulled out one of the stamps that is the thread, and I stamped that in some raspberry ink to match my spool that is on top of my sewing machine. There is a coordinating die to cut this out, and I'm just going to add this with a little dot of glue to touch the sewing machine and the spool. So I'm tucking it behind the spool and in front of the sewing machine, and I think that was a perfect finishing touch to the top of this card. Just felt a little bit empty up there at the top. Now I'm moving on to my baking themed card, and I'm doing the exact same thing here. So I'm starting with that sort of spine sentiment banner. I'm popping this up so I can kind of see what's going on, and I will be adding my images to that banner. So I have my mixer, my little egg. It's always good to start with your large image first and kind of have that as your base that everything can go off of. Then I have my piping bag that I'm tucking behind the little shaker. And those are all the pieces I'm going to put on top. So I will laminate or layer the banner with the text on it over top. And you can see now those things look like they're tucked behind it. You could have some of them come in front of it, like the tip of the piping bag would be fine to come in front of it because it's not going to cover up the sentiment. That's all kind of dependent on the sentiment that you use. And now I'm adding all those pieces to that bottom panel. And I like this little kind of pile of flour sitting on top of the butter. I just think that's kind of cute. And now on to our third one, the same thing, starting with that spine that is the stitch sentiment banner. And for this one, I had to get a little creative on how things touched each other. So I'm adding my skewer to the grill, and then the flames are going to be just barely tucked behind what's on the grill there. And this one's only stuck down by the feet of the grill. For this hot dog, I'm putting it on the fork, and then that fork is going to be attached to that banner as well. Then I can put my banner with my sentiment over top. This is a perfect example of one that fills the banner, and you might not want your images overlapping the front of the sentiment banner. And here is that extra ketchup bottle that I created. And the mustard. I felt like I just needed one more image down here, which is why I ended up stamping out and coloring that ketchup bottle. And then I have the one little mushroom, which I just think is so fun to just add down here. Now for this one, I did do a little stamping, which you could do on the others with hearts or something if you wanted. This one has these little smoke swirls, and I'm stamping that in some manatee ink just right onto that plaid paper. So here are my three all assembled, and of course I need to put the little tab on the top that indicates that you should pull it. And all I did was revisit the color that I have on the inside of the card. So when you pull it, you can see I have the yellow that shows, so I used a yellow tab for that card. For this one, it's going to be that teal aqua color, which is the same as the inside when you pull the tab. And for this one, I went with the green. This is a great way to use the extra scraps of paper when you are creating your project. So now they are all assembled and I just need to put them on a card base, and I have covered the back with foam tape so that this can be popped up off the card base so that you can really grab that tab and pull. And for each of these, I'm using a kraft cardstock card base. And I also think this gives some really fun dimension off that card base too, because we have that nice craft border around everything. So there is my finished set of cards. Of course, it's not finished until there's a little bit of glitter on there. So I'm adding my glitter accents, and I wanted to point out on this one, you're going to see me open the card and put glitter on that cupcake inside. So you want to do this, and then you want to make sure that it dries. So I'm setting a block there so it won't accidentally close and that glitter can dry. For my sewing machine, I'm just adding glitter kind of everywhere. This whole sewing room, I think, was dusted with fairy dust. And so there's glitter on all of the items on this card. And then finally, for my Father's Day grilling card, yes, I did add glitter to that one as well. I kept it off the actual food, but I'm adding glitter to the flames and the charcoal. I will add some to the squiggle of mustard on the hot dog just because I thought that was really cute. But not any to the hot dogs themselves. So here is my trio of hobby-themed pull and slide cards with coordinating gift cards, by the way. I think this is fun to give a gift card for whoever you're giving this to if that's their hobby. So I have Williams Sonoma for baking, a Michael's card for the sewing or any other hobby store. And then for grilling, I have Lowe's, but I should probably make that Ace Hardware since that's where my dad works. So here is those really fun cards. I had a lot of fun making these and pulling out some old favorite stamp sets to make them. So here is another look at them all pulled open. And I hope this has inspired you to look at your stamp sets and figure out what kind of collage style pull and slide cards you can create. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.